Some of you have heard the story before, but in fact, there's someone in the audience who's never heard the story in front of an audience before, so I'm a little more nervous than I normally am telling the story. I used to be a photographer for many years. In 1978, I was working for Time magazine, and I was given a 3-day assignment to photograph Amerasian children who had been fathered by American GIs all over Southeast Asia, and then abandoned. 40,000 children all over Asia. I'd never heard the word Amerasian before. I spent a few days photographing children in different countries, and like a lot of photographers and a lot of journalists, I always hoped that when my pictures were published, they might actually have an effect on a situation instead of just documenting it. So I was so disturbed by what I saw, and I was so unhappy with the article that ran afterwards, that I decided I would take 6 months off. I was 28 years old. I decided I would find 6 children in different countries and actually go spend some time with the kids and try to tell their story a little bit better than I thought I had done for Time magazine. In the course of doing the story, I was looking for children who hadn't been photographed before, and there was the Pearl Buck Foundation told me that they worked with a lot of Americans who were donating money to help some of these kids. And a man told me who ran the Pearl Buck Foundation in Korea that there was a young girl who was 11 years old being raised by her grandmother, and the grandmother had never let any Westerners ever see her. Every time any Westerners came to the village, she hid the girl. And of course, I was immediately intrigued. I saw photographs of her, and I thought I wanted to go. And the guy just told me, "There's no way this grandmother won't even. There's no way she's ever going to let you meet this girl that she's raising." I took a translator with me. I went to this village, found the grandmother, sat down with her, and to my astonishment, she agreed to let me photograph her granddaughter. And I was paying for this. Let me photograph her granddaughter, and I was paying for this myself. So I asked the translator if it would be okay if I stayed for the week. I had a sleeping bag. The family had a small shed on the side of the house, so I said, could I sleep in my sleeping bag in the evenings? And I just told the little girl, whose name was Unsuk Lee, that if I ever did anything to embarrass her, she didn't speak a word of English, although she looked very American, she could just put up her hand. And so there I was, I couldn't speak a word of Korean. And this is the first night I met Unsuk. Her mother was still alive. Her mother was not raising her. Her grandmother was raising her. And what struck me immediately was how in love the two of these people were. The grandmother was incredibly fond, deeply in love with this little girl. They slept on the floor at night. The way they heat their homes in Korea is to put bricks under the floor, so the heat actually radiates from underneath the floor. Unsuk was 11 years old. I had photographed, as I said, a lot of these kids. Unsuk was, in fact, the 5th child that I found to photograph, and in almost universally amongst all the kids, they were really psychologically damaged by having been made fun of, ridiculed, picked on, and been rejected. And Korea was probably the place I found to be the worst for these kids. And what struck me immediately in meeting Unsuk was how confident she appeared to be, how happy she seemed to be in her own skin. And remember this picture, so I'm going to show you another picture later, but you can see how much she looks like her grandmother, although she looks so Western. I decided to follow her to school. This is the first morning I stayed with her. This is on the way to school. This is the morning assembly outside her school. And I noticed that she was clowning around. When the teachers would ask questions, she'd be the first person to raise her hand. Again, not at all shy or withdrawn or anything like the other children that I'd photographed. Again, the first one to go to the blackboard to answer questions, getting in trouble for whispering into her best friend's ears in the middle of class. And one of the other things I'd said to her through the translator, again, this thing about saying stop, was to not pay attention to me. And so she really just completely ignored me most of the time. I noticed that at recess, she was the girl who picked the other girls to be on her team. It was very obvious from the very beginning that she was a leader. This is on the way home. And that's North Korea up along the hill. There's up along the DMZ. They would actually cover the windows every night so that light couldn't be seen, because the South Korean government has said for years the North Koreans may invade at any time. So there's always this, the closer you were to North Korea, the more terrifying it was. Very often at school, I'd be taking pictures and she would whisper into her girlfriend's ears and then look at me and say, stop. And I would stand at attention, and all the girls would crack up, and it was sort of a little joke. The end of the week came, and my translator came back as I'd asked her to come back so I could formally thank the grandmother and Unsuk. And in the course of the grandmother talking to the translator, the grandmother started crying. And I said to my translator, what's going on? Why is she crying? And she spoke to the grandmother for a moment, and then she started getting tears in her eyes. And I said, okay, what did I do? What's going on? Why is everyone crying? And the translator said, the grandmother says that she thinks she's dying, and she wants to know if you would take Unsuk to America with you. And I said, I'm 28 years old, and I live in hotels, and I'm not married. And I mean, I'd fallen in love with this girl, but I was like emotionally, I was about 12 years old. If you know photographers, the joke is it's the finest form of delayed adolescence ever invented. Sorry, honey, I have to go on an assignment. I'll be back, and then you never come back. So I asked the translator why she thought she was dying. Could I get her a hospital? Could I pay to get her a doctor? And she refused any help at all. And so when I got outside, I actually gave the translator some money and said, please go back and see if you can do something. And I gave the grandmother my business card. And I said, if you're serious, I will try to find a family for her. And I immediately wrote a letter to my best friends in Atlanta, Georgia, who had an 11-year-old son. And my best friend had mistakenly one day said something about wishing he had another child. So here, my friends Jean and Gail had not heard from me in about a year. And I suddenly was calling saying, I'm in Korea and I met this extraordinary girl. And I said, the grandmother thinks she's sick, but I think maybe we would have to bring the grandmother over also. And I said, I'll pay for the I mean, I had this whole sort of picture. So anyway, I left, and my friends actually said they were very interested in adopting her, and I said, look, I think I'll scare the grandmother to death if I actually write to her and tell her that you're willing to adopt her. I want to go back and talk to her, but I was off on assignment. I figured I'd come back in a couple of weeks and talk to the grandmother. And on Christmas Day, I was in Bangkok with a group of photographers and got a telegram. Back in those days, you got telegrams from Time magazine saying someone in Korea had died and left their child in a will to me. Did I know anything about this? Because I hadn't told them what I was doing because I was so upset with the story they'd run. So I went back to Korea, and I went back to Unsuk's village, and she was gone. And the house that I had spent time in was empty. It was incredibly cold. No one in the village would tell me where Unsuk was because the grandmother had always hidden her from Westerners, and they had no idea about this request that she'd made of me. So I finally found Myung-sun, her best friend that she used to play with after school every day. And Myung-sun, under some pressure from me and the translator, gave us an address on the outside of Seoul. And I went to that address, and I knocked on the door, and a man answered the door. It was not a very nice area of Seoul, sort of mud streets outside of it. And I knocked on the door, and Unsuk answered the door, and her eyes were bloodshot, and she seemed to be in shock. She didn't recognize, there was no recognition whatsoever. And this man came to the door and kind of barked something in Korean, and I said to the translator, what did he say? And she said, he wants to know who you are. And I said, well, tell him that I am a photographer. And I started explaining who I was, and he interrupted, and she said, he says he knows who you are. What do you want? I said, well, tell him that I was asked by this little girl's grandmother to find a family for her, and he said, I'm her uncle. She's fine. You can leave now. So I was, the door's being slammed in my face. It's incredibly cold. And I'm trying to think, what would the hero do in a movie if I was writing this as a movie script? So I said, listen, it's really cold. I've come a very long way. Do you mind if I just come in for a minute? I'm freezing. So the guy kind of reluctantly let us in, and we sat down on the floor. And as we started talking, I saw him yell something, and Unsuk came and brought us some food. And I had this whole mental picture of sort of like Cinderella. I sort of had this picture of this incredibly wonderful, bright, happy little child who now appeared to be very withdrawn, being enslaved by this family. And I was really appalled, and I couldn't figure out what to do. And the more I tried talking to him, the less friendly he was getting. So I finally decided, I said, look, this is all through the translator, because this is all, I don't speak a word of Korean. And I said, look, I'm really glad that Unsuk had a family to live with. I was very worried about her. I made a promise to her grandmother, your mother, that I would find a family, and now I'm so happy you're going to take care of her. I said, but I bought an airline ticket, and I'm stuck here for a week. And I said, I'm staying at a hotel downtown. Would you like to come have lunch tomorrow? And you can practice your English, because he told me, I was trying to ask him questions about himself. And so I went to the hotel, and I found two older aberrations, a girl whose mother had been a prostitute, and she was a prostitute, and a boy who had been in and out of jail. And I said to them, look, there's a little girl who has a tiny chance of getting out of here and going to America. And I said, I don't know if it's the right decision or not, but I would like you to come to lunch tomorrow and tell the uncle what it's like to walk down the street, what people say to you, what you do for a living, and just, I want him